My name is Paige Sutherland. I'm 33 years old. And I found out about my mom's 60th birthday party from a photo my aunt sent me by mistake. The invitation had hydrangeas on it and silver script, and my sister's name on the hosting line. Mine was nowhere at all. My mother wasn't inviting me because looking at me means looking at my father. And she has spent 14 years refusing to do either. 38 guests, a rented tent, a cake with her name and buttercream, and one daughter quietly erased from the guest list like a typo. But the party isn't the story. The story is what happened a month later in my mother's kitchen, when I set a gift on her table and said one quiet sentence that made her face go completely still. None of them saw it coming. Honestly, neither did I. Welcome back to Calm Drama Vault, where quiet people finally say the things they've been swallowing for years. If stories about family, boundaries, and hard-won peace speak to you, drop a comment below and subscribe, because this one starts with a birthday and ends with a door only one person gets to open. Let me tell you who I am on paper, because it matters. I'm an emergency room nurse in Columbus, Ohio. 10 years on the floor. I've started IVs in a moving ambulance. I've told strangers their husbands didn't make it and held their coats while they sat down. My hands don't shake. That's the job. Here's the other job. The unpaid one. I manage my mother's blood pressure medication, which is its own kind of joke, and we'll get to that. I schedule her furnace guy. I drive 40 minutes down to Millersburg once a month with groceries and her prescriptions because the pharmacy there closes early. When her gallbladder came out 6 years ago, I slept 3 nights in a vinyl hospital chair. When her roof leaked, I found the contractor and checked his license. I know her insurance login, her policy numbers, and which pharmacist she trusts. And with all of that in my hands, I still had no idea she was having a party. I'm the first call when something breaks. I'm not on the list when something's celebrated. I used to say that like a joke at work, dry, the way nurses say things. My friend Renata would look at me over her coffee and not laugh. Somewhere along the way, being needed had started to feel like being loved, and I'd stopped checking the difference. That's the part I want you to remember, because everything that happened this spring came down to that one confusion. Hold that thought, because on a Tuesday afternoon in April, my Aunt Diane's thumb slipped, and the checking got done for me. I'd worked a night shift and slept until 2. My phone buzzed while the coffee brewed. It was the cousins group thread, the old one nobody uses. The one that mostly gets forwarded recipes and blurry pictures of somebody's dog. Aunt Diane had posted a photo. She's 55 and photographs things at an angle, so the invitation was tilted, but I could read it fine. Hydrangeas. Silver script, Vivian's 60th, Saturday the 14th, hosted by Kendall Sutherland. 3 weeks away. I stood in my kitchen holding my coffee and read it maybe 5 times. Then I did what any nurse does with a bad lab value. I scrolled for context. The thread went back 2 weeks. Casserole assignments. Who's bringing folding tables? Somebody asking if the tent company needed a deposit. My cousin Rachel volunteering her husband's smoker. 2 weeks of planning. Right there in a thread I was technically in. Except every message about the party had been in some other thread, and this one photo had escaped the fence. 30-8 people knew my mother was turning 60 under a rented tent. I found out from a hydrangea. I typed back to Diane, just her, keeping it light because light is a reflex. Cute invite. When were you going to tell me? 3 dots appeared. The dots stopped. Then the photo itself blinked out of the thread. Deleted like a hand pulled back from a hot stove. I sat down at my kitchen table, and the coffee went cold next to me. And I want to be precise about what I felt, because it wasn't rage yet. It was recognition. The way you feel when a patient's numbers finally explain a symptom you've been watching for years. Something had been decided about me. The only open questions were how long ago, and by how many people. To make sense of a hydrangea, you have to go back 14 years. To the summer, I was 19. I'd just finished my first year of nursing school. I came home to Millersburg in May, and by June my father was loading his truck. Gordon Sutherland, packing an F-150 at 7 in the morning like he was going fishing. Except the boxers had his whole closet in them. There was a woman named Cheryl in Georgia. There had been, we learned, for almost 2 years, my mother stood at the kitchen window with her hands in the sink and watched him back out of the driveway. And she did not cry, at least not where anyone could bill her for it. She was 45. Kendall was 15 and spent that summer at her friend's house, which nobody questioned. I stayed. I made the casseroles the church ladies didn't bring, or brought with commentary attached. A week after he left, the wedding photos came down. That made sense to me. Then I noticed my high school graduation portrait was gone, the one where I'm laughing with my head tilted back. I found it in the garage, face down in a box of his old work shirts. I asked her about it in the kitchen that night, gently, the way you ask about a wound. She looked at me for a long moment, drying her hands on a towel, and said it plainly, like a doctor reading a chart. You have his face. That was all. No apology, no cruelty in her voice, which somehow made it worse. Just a fact being filed where facts go. I was 19 years old. Standing in my mother's kitchen, learning that my face had become a piece of evidence. The trial, it turned out, would run for 14 years, and I would volunteer to keep showing up for it. Nobody announces a policy like that. It gets implemented in small print. The Christmas I was 22. My mother's holiday card went out to 60 households with a family photo on it, and my left shoulder made the frame. Just the shoulder. Kendall stood centered between Mom and Grandma Iris, and the crop line ran right through me, clean as a surgical margin. At Thanksgiving, there was suddenly a seating issue every year, and every year it resolved the same way, with me at the card table by the kitchen door. Passing gravy to 7-year-olds. At Kendall's wedding, my sister raised a glass and thanked everyone who made her who she was by name, a long list. Aunts and youth pastors and a college roommate. The list did not include me, and my mother applauded with her eyes shining. When new people joined the church, Mom introduced us in a set order. This is Kendall, my right hand, and this is Paige. Paige works in Columbus. That was my whole biography, a city. But here's the twisted part. The part that kept me in it. Whenever something went wrong, the policy got suspended. Gallbladder surgery. And suddenly, I'm the one sleeping in the chair. Reading her discharge papers, arguing with billing, roof, furnace, a lump in her breast that turned out to be nothing, and my phone rang before anyone else's. I was essential personnel. I just wasn't family. Not the kind you frame. I used to think if I carried enough, she'd finally look at what I was carrying instead of whose face I carried it with. Write that sentence down somewhere. Because it took me 14 years and one ambulance ride to hear how it sounds when you say it out loud. Now, before you decide I was a doormat, let me show you my receipts. Because I did not sit quietly for 14 years. When I was 28, I drove down and said it to her face at that same kitchen table. Mom, do you realize every family photo stops at my shoulder? She went very still. And then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She got warm. For one entire week, I had a mother. She called about nothing. She mailed me a recipe card for peach jam in her actual handwriting. I floated. Then the week ended quietly, like a coupon expiring, and the card table was waiting for me at Easter. I suggested family counseling once, carefully, using the word we. She said, "We're not that kind of family. We handle things privately." And then she asked if I could look at a mole on her back. And I did, because that's the kind of family we were. I called my father exactly once, 3 years ago, a Tuesday. He talked about his boat for 10 minutes, said we should talk more, promised to call that weekend. He never called. One parent left in a truck, the other stayed and left a little more each year, and between them I learned to hold still. And over it all hung my grandmother, Iris, 7 years gone now, who took my hand in a hospital bed and said, "Take care of your mother. She's not as strong as she looks." I promised. You don't unsign a promise like that, or I didn't think you could. The slot machine paid out just often enough to keep me on the stool, and Iris's voice kept my seat warm. And that, friends, is how a competent woman stays 19 for 14 years. Here's what makes this next part hard to tell. 8 months before that hydrangea showed up, I had started making her a gift. A quilt. 60 squares for 60 years. 1 square for every year of Vivian Sutherland's life. My grandmother, Iris, taught me to quilt when I was little. Both of us bent over her lap frame, while my mother baked in the next room. Back when my face was still just a face. I'd been collecting fabric for years without admitting what for. A strip of the old kitchen curtains, yellow with little coffee cups, from the house I grew up in. A piece of Iris's Sunday apron. A scrap from the christening gown Kendall's daughter, Lily, wore, that Kendall was going to throw out. And square number 26, the year I was born. Cut from the baby blanket my mother sewed for me herself, back when she looked at my face and saw only me in it. I worked on it at night after shifts. Needle in, needle out, the way some people pray. By spring, I had most of the 60 squares finished, pinned up in rows across my living room floor. 1 square stayed empty, square 45, her 45th year, the year the truck backed out of the driveway. I kept telling myself I just hadn't found the right fabric for it. Which is the kind of lie that sounds exactly like patience, so picture it. A woman who isn't invited to the party, staying up past midnight, sewing the birthday present, 60 squares for a woman who couldn't stand 60 seconds of her face. If you're yelling at your screen right now, believe me, Renata got there first. But hang on to that empty square. It matters more than anything else in this story. I found out 2 days after the hydrangea. Then I called my sister. Kendall picked up on the 4th ring with her kitchen fan voice, the bright one. I kept mine easy. So, the 14th, huh? A pause. You could have parked a car in it. It's small, she said. Mom wants it low-key. Kendall, I said. There's a tent. Diane posted the invitation. I saw the thread, the smoker, the casserole spreadsheet. 38 people is not low-key. It's a wedding with no groom. She exhaled the way she does. Half laugh, half apology, all static. Look, she said, don't take this the wrong way. Mom just thinks it's easier if you're not there. You know how she gets around you. I looked out my window at the parking lot of my building. At a shopping cart someone had abandoned against the fence. And I asked the question I'd never once asked out loud in 14 years. Around me, I said, or around my face. The silence went long enough that I could hear Lily singing somewhere behind her, some cartoon theme, bright as a bell. Please don't make this a thing, Kendall finally said. She's turning 60, Paige. It's one day. Can't you just let her have it? Here's what I heard. Actually heard. For the first time. Not you're not invited. I'd survived that plenty. What I heard was, we talked about you. We weighed it, and the scale came down on the side of the tent. It wasn't an oversight. Oversights don't need a spokesperson. I said okay. Which wasn't agreement, just triage, and hung up and stood very still in my kitchen. Then I picked up my needle, because my hands needed somewhere to be, and I sewed square number 52, and I thought about doors. The monthly grocery run fell that Saturday, and I want you to understand that I went, because that's the shape I was in. 40 minutes down Route 62, with her prescriptions in the passenger seat. Same as always. Her kitchen smelled like lemon furniture, polish, and coffee. The smell of my whole childhood. She was pleased with me in her way. She'd found the blood pressure log I'd made her. She was filling it in. Wasn't that good of her? I put the milk away and said it without turning around. Keeping my voice level. A nurse asking about symptoms. So, the 14th. I hear it's 38 people. The refrigerator hummed. When I turned, she was wiping her hands on a dishtowel.com as a lake. Diane's coming, she said. The church ladies, the hen. I want one day, Paige. One day where nobody's whispering, where I don't have to explain anything to anyone. Explain what, Mom? She folded the towel in half, then in half again, and looked at me with something that was almost tenderness. Which is the part I still have trouble describing. Your face, honey, she said. You walk in and everybody remembers what happened to me. She said it the way you'd read a weather report. Gentle. 60% chance of your daughter's face. Then she opened the cupboard and handed me a jar of peach jam, the good kind she makes in the fall, and said, for the drive back, like we'd just had a lovely visit. I stood in that lemon-polished kitchen holding a jar of jam, and I understood something I'd been dodging for 14 years. She wasn't angry at me. Anger you can argue with. I had simply been classified, filed under his name, and the filing cabinet had a lock. I thanked her for the jam. I'm not proud of that, and I drove home, 40 minutes back up Route 62. With the jam on the passenger seat where the prescriptions had been. I picked up an extra shift that night. Busy hands, quiet head. That's been my medicine since I was 19. Around 3 in the morning, restocking a supply cart, I felt my heart do a strange little stutter step, a flutter and a thud, like missing a stair in the dark. I stood still. It passed. I drank some water and told myself what we always tell ourselves. Dehydration, caffeine, night shift. Nurses make the worst patients. At the end of the shift, I caught my reflection in the locker room mirror. Under that flat fluorescent light that flatters no one. Dark hair, his jaw, his eyebrows, the left one that lifts on its own. And for one bad minute, I saw what she sees. A man in an F-150, backing out of a driveway. My body had started keeping a record even though I refused to. Bodies are honest like that. Mine was about to get much louder. 3 in the morning. 2 nights later, the break room. Renata Aguilar, charged nurse, 40. The kind of friend who watches you instead of your story. She caught me on my phone, thumb hovering over the confirm button on a flower order. 60 roses, autumn colors. Delivery to Millersburg on the 14th. Same order I place every year. She looked at the screen, then at me, and set down her coffee. You're sending flowers, she said, to the party you're banned from. It's her birthday. I said. Renata, let that sit. Then she said, the thing that ruined me in the useful way. 14 years, Paige. You're not her daughter right now. You're auditioning for the part. She leaned back. When's the callback? I laughed, because that's what I do. And I changed the subject to bed 14's potassium. And Renata let me, because good friends know a seed needs dark to split open. But the word followed me home like the smell of the hospital. Auditioning. I thought about the quilt on my living room floor, the monthly grocery runs, the blood pressure log I'd made with little boxes she could check, every one of them a headshot, a resume, a callback for a role that had been cast 14 years ago, cast to a woman with my mother's face, my sister, who never had to read a single line for it. And here's what I did with that insight, since we're being honest. I pressed confirm on the flowers. I want you to sit with that, because if you've ever loved someone in a way that embarrassed you, you know the button. Aunt Diane called me a few evenings later, and her voice had the sound of someone who's been rehearsing in the car. Honey? About that photo. I told her it was fine, which is the family's native language. And she didn't take the exit, which is why I'll love her forever. It's not fine, she said, and you deserve to know it wasn't some mix-up. So I got the anatomy of it. There was a group chat, of course. Mom's Big 620, started 2 months back. Kendall at the wheel, 30-something people in it, cousins I hadn't seen since Iris's funeral. And in week 1, my cousin Rachel, bless her spreadsheet heart, had typed the obvious question, what about Paige? The answer came back and got repeated in that soft mafia way families have, until everyone could recite it. Vivian's keeping the guest list comfortable. Comfortable. I stood at my kitchen counter, turning the word over like a stone. Comfort for the guests. Comfort for my mother. My absence. A kind of furniture. Diane kept going, and her voice dropped low the way it does when she's near something old. You don't know what those church women did to your mother back then, she said. In 2010, the casseroles were a competition and the pity was a knife. And your mama stood there every Sunday and took it. And something in her just, and then Diane stopped herself. The way you stop at the edge of somebody else's property. It's not my story to tell, she said. I asked her what that had to do with my face. She was quiet a second. Everything, honey, she said. That's the problem. Everything. After we hung up, I stood there a long time. Somewhere in Millersburg, there was a story I'd never been told. From the year I was 19, the year of the truck and the box of work shirts, I'd spent 14 years being the symptom of something. For the first time, somebody had implied there was a chart, an actual history, a reason with a date on it. I didn't have the chart yet, but I knew who did. And I knew it wasn't my mother. I decided to try one more time, in person, with terms so small they couldn't be refused. That's what I told myself. In the ER, we call it a Hail Mary dose. I asked her to lunch at the diner on Main in Millersburg. Neutral ground, orange vinyl booths, pie under glass on the counter. I prepared for that lunch the way I prepare for a shift handoff. Actual bullet points in my head, rehearsed in the shower. Keep it calm. Ask for the minimum. Give her every exit. She ordered the club sandwich and asked the waitress about her mother's hip. Because my mother is lovely to waitresses. And then she looked at me, pleasant and fortified. And I made my offer. Mom, I'd like to be there on the 14th. I'll come early and help Kendall set up. I'll stay in the kitchen if you want. I'll run the food. And I'd just like to stand in the family picture. That's all. I heard my own words land on the table between us. Stay in the kitchen. Run the food. I was negotiating for a staff position at my mother's birthday, and I'd opened with it. And some part of me stood outside the booth, watching this woman in her good blazer applying for the job of daughter, offering references. My mother set down her iced tea, and she was gracious, which was the worst possible sign. Paige, she said, why do you always make everything about you? It's my day. Kendall understands. Kendall doesn't make people uncomfortable. Then, with no seam at all, she asked whether her new pill was better in the morning or at night, because the pharmacist had said one thing and the internet said another. And I answered her, morning with food. I said, nurse first, always, even at my own execution. She patted my hand when we left, said, this was nice. We should do it more often. I sat in my car outside the diner and watched her drive off, and I finally admitted the math I'd been refusing to do. There was no level of useful I could reach that would buy back my own face. The currency was never effort. It never had been. Back at work that week, between a chest pain and a kid with a broken wrist, I did something I'd been avoiding. I sat down at the triage station and put the cuff on my own arm. I'm the one who tells patients not to be scared of the number. The cuff squeezed, sighed, and gave me mine. 156/94. I sat there and looked at it the way you look at rain through a windshield. That's not a number you walk off. That's a number with a plan for you. So I did the responsible things. Because I am nothing if not responsible for everyone, including occasionally myself. I called my doctor's office. First available appointment, 3 weeks out, which put it after the party, because that's American healthcare. I cut my caffeine to 1 cup. I bought a home monitor with a log, a nicer one than I'd bought my mother, which is its own little poem. And then Jess, from Dashift, called crying. Her son had an ear infection and no one to cover. And I heard myself say, "I'll take it," before she finished the sentence. Somebody had to. Somebody is always me. That night, wired on exhaustion, I did the thing you should never do at 2 in the morning. I opened my phone's photo album and went looking for proof I was in this family. 10 years of holidays. I counted 58 group photos. In 48 of them, I am at the edge, half-turned, cropped at the shoulder, or behind someone taller. 48 out of 58. You can't unknow a number like that. I closed the phone and picked up the quilt and sewed the border on square 59, and my pulse tapped away in my thumb like a stranger knocking. And I remember thinking, clear as a bell in an empty church, what do you call it when the medicine you keep taking is the thing that's poisoning you? The Sunday night before party week, I cleared my living room floor, pushed the couch back, and laid out all 60 squares in order. 10 rows of 6. The whole length of my mother's life on a nurse's carpet. Square 1. A scrap of flannel from the baby gown Iris had saved in tissue paper for 60 years. Square 18. A bit of the dress Mom wore in her high school portrait, the one where she looks like Kendall with older eyes. Square 26. My year, the year she was 26, and sewed a yellow blanket for a daughter she hadn't met, and embroidered a little sun in the corner. I sat cross-legged on the floor with my tea going cold, and looked at the one hole in the grid. Square 45, 8th row, 3rd from the left. The year of the truck, the year of Cheryl, the year the photos came down, and my face went into the garage in a box of work shirts. I had 59 finished squares and 1 empty hole, and I'd been calling it a fabric problem for 8 months. It was never a fabric problem, it was a truth problem. Nothing I could sew there was true except one thing. I got up, went to my closet, and pulled out my oldest set of scrubs. The faded teal ones, the pair I wore for 3 nights in a vinyl chair when they took her gallbladder out. The pair I couldn't throw away and couldn't explain why. I cut a clean square out of the shirt, right through the chest, and I sat back down and sewed it into row 5. Year 45 wasn't just the year my father left, it was the year I started paying his bill. The quilt should tell the truth. All 60 years of it, including the ones she'd rather crop. And somewhere between the pinning and the last stitch, a decision got made quietly, the way the big ones do. I would finish this quilt, and after her party, on a day with no tent and no witnesses she could perform for, I was going to drive to Millersburg, put it in her hands, and say the thing I had never once said in 14 years. I didn't have the words yet, but for the first time, I had the appointment. Thursday before the party, I worked 14 hours. 2 traumas, 1 code we lost, a full waiting room flickering under a fluorescent tube nobody had come to fix. I got home at 9 and my phone lit up. Kendall. Hey, Mom asks, can you drop the folding chairs at my place tomorrow morning? We need all 12. Then the second message, the one I read 4 times, standing in my hallway with my shoes still on. Before noon if you can. So you're gone before people start coming by. So you're gone before people start coming by. There it was, in my sister's cheerful little font. The whole 14 years in one sentence. Bring the chairs, vanish by noon, be the staff, then be the smoke. And I want to be honest with you about what I did, because this is the part I'd edit out if I were lying to you. I typed, sure thing. Friday morning, gorgeous May sun. I loaded 12 folding chairs into my trunk and drove 40 minutes to Millersburg. To my sister's house, where the tent was going up in the backyard like a small white circus. Her husband, Neil, waved from a ladder. Lily's sidewalk chalk hearts covered the driveway. I stacked chairs in the garage. Third trip, arms full. And somewhere between the car and the garage door, the morning tilted. A band tightened across my chest, slow and certain, like a cuff inflating that nobody was squeezing. My left ear filled with ocean. The edges of the driveway went dark and grainy, and the chairs got very heavy and very far away. 10 years of training took the wheel while the rest of me floated. I sat down on the bumper. I heard my own voice, flat and clinical, say, Kendall, call 911. Chest pressure radiating. I'm sweating through my shirt. Tell them, 33, female, hypertensive. My sister stood on her chalk-hearted driveway, holding a box of ribbon, staring at me like I'd broken a rule. The last thing I registered before the sirens was the tent guy on the ladder, frozen, one string of party lights in his hand. They loaded me 8 steps from the spot where the head table would go. I never did see the party. Turns out I was done auditioning. They took me to the county hospital in Millersburg, which is a strange place to be a patient when you've spent your life being the nurse. The gown ties in the back. The ceiling tiles have a water stain shaped like Ohio. And I lay there memorizing it while machines I know by model number reported me to strangers. Here's the medical truth. Plainly, because you've earned it. My troponin came back clean. No heart attack. What I had was a blood pressure of 192/110. A hypertensive crisis riding on top of a panic attack riding on top of years of unprocessed everything. They kept me overnight on a monitor. The resident, Dr. Nakamura, young and unhurried, read my chart, then read me, and said the sentence I'd like printed on cards for every woman I know. Your labs say your heart is fine, he said. Your pressure says your life isn't whatever you've been carrying. Your body just filed a complaint. Renata drove down from Columbus in her pajama pants and sat in the vinyl chair, my usual seat, and did not say I told you so, which is a love language. And then Kendall came, smelling like ribbon and stress, eyes red, and I watched my baby sister stand at the foot of my hospital bed and select her words. First question, do you want me to tell Mom? Not, what did the doctor say? Second, smaller, after a glance at her phone, it's just the parties tomorrow and I don't want to stress her out. There it was again, the family scale, and me, on the light side of it, in a hospital gown, in the town where I was born. Something in me went very calm. The calm I usually have to borrow for other people's emergencies. No, I said, don't stress her. Kendall heard obedience and relaxed. She squeezed my foot through the blanket and went home to fold napkins. But I wasn't obeying. I was charting. Note the time. Note the vitals. Note who stood where, and what they reached for first. In 14 years of collecting evidence against myself, it was the first entry I'd ever filed on my own behalf. They discharged me Saturday morning, the morning of the party, with a prescription for Lissy, a follow-up appointment, and instructions to avoid stress, which is medicine's little joke. Renata brought her car around. Sitting in her passenger seat in the hospital parking lot, I turned my phone back on. One text from my mother. I'd like to tell you I had to read it twice because it was shocking, but the truth is I read it twice because it wasn't. Feel better. Please don't do anything dramatic before today. It's important to me. That was the whole message. No question mark anywhere in it. Nothing about labs or monitors or the fact that her firstborn had left her granddaughter's chalk hearts in an ambulance. Just a hedge against drama. Sent to a woman with an IV bruise, 8 hours before cake. Renata read it over my shoulder and said something I won't repeat on this channel. I sat with the phone in my lap while the parking lot filled with ordinary Saturday people. And I felt something I can only describe as a changing of shifts. The person who had been on duty for 14 years, the auditioner, the chair hauler, the jam receiver, clocked out. Someone quieter clocked in. I did 2 things from that passenger seat before Renata even pulled out. I texted the therapist Renata had been gently mentioning for a year, Marisa Reyes, and asked for the first opening she had. And I opened the Notes app and made a new file and typed a title at the top and nothing else. What I will say then. I looked at that blinking cursor for a long moment and closed the phone. Doctors can lower your blood pressure. They cannot prescribe you a mother who looks at you and sees you. If you have ever sat alone on the discharge bench while your family worried about a tent, this next part is yours. Stay with me. Because what I finally said in her kitchen took me 14 years and 1 empty text file to write, and I'm going to give you every word of it. The party happened Saturday, and I did the healthy thing, which felt exactly like the lonely thing. Renata came over with takeout and bad reality television, and I left my phone in the bedroom like a confiscated weapon. That held until Sunday. Sunday, the photos found me, the way water finds a basement. The tent, white and glowing, party lights that someone had straightened after all. 38 guests on my sister's lawn. My mother, in a new blue dress, radiant, genuinely radiant, holding a sheet cake with her name piped in buttercream, Kendall mid-toast, glass raised, and the caption she wrote under her own post. To the woman who holds this family together. I scrolled like you press on a bruise to confirm it's still yours. And then I found the comment. A woman from the church, one of the casserole battalion, had written, "What a beautiful day, Vivian. Where's your other girl?" And my mother had replied, from her own account, with a little red heart. Paige couldn't get away from the hospital. She works so much. We missed her. I read it 3 times, and on the third read, the strangest thing happened. The hurt stepped back, and something colder and clearer stepped forward. My mother had not forgotten me. Forgetting would have been mercy, at least the accidental kind. She had written a caption for me. She'd taken the daughter she banned and edited her into a hardworking absence with a heart emoji, in public, in writing. And here's the thing about that lie. You only bother lying about what you know won't survive daylight, somewhere under the blue dress and the buttercream. My mother knew exactly what she had done, and knew it couldn't be said out loud at her own party. Shame is a strange kind of confession. I put the phone face down on the counter and looked at the quilt folded on my chair, all 60 squares in, waiting on their binding. And I said out loud to my empty kitchen, 1 more week. Marissa Reyes had a cancellation Tuesday afternoon, which felt like the universe finally covering a shift for me. Her office was a plain room over a bakery, and the whole hour smelled faintly of bread, which I recommend for therapy if you can arrange it. I did what I do. I gave report. Patient is a 33-year-old female. Family history of exclusion, presenting with 14 years of symptoms. Here's the timeline. Here's the medication list. Here's the party. I was organized. I cited sources. Marissa listened with her head tilted, and when I finally ran out of chart, she asked one question, mild as milk. You've told me everything you do for her, she said. Tell me one thing she does for you. The bakery hummed. A car went by. I opened my mouth and nothing came out, and we both sat there and listened to the nothing. And the nothing went on so long it developed a personality. I thought of jam. I actually opened my mouth to say peach jam, and heard how it would sound. A grown woman offering a jar of preserves as evidence of her mother's love. Jam versus 14 years. And closed it again. Marissa didn't push. She just said gently, you've been holding a job, not a relationship. And then, what do you get out of staying on the payroll? I looked at my hands, the steady ones, the ones that don't shake. Hope, I said. It came out rough, like something dragged up from under a floor. She nodded like I'd finally given her the real chief complaint. Her homework sounded simple and wasn't. Write down what you want, she said. Not what you can survive. What you want. Nobody had asked me that since Iris died. I drove home with the windows down and started the list at a red light in my head. And the first item scared me so much I missed the green. Aunt Diane showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening with a foil-covered plate of leftovers from the party I was banned from, which is either dark comedy or love. And with Diane, it's usually both. She sat at my little table and told me the story with a date on it, 2010. The first Sunday after my father left, my mother put on her yellow dress and went to church, because staying home would have confirmed everything. Diane walked in beside her. The congregation went quiet in that way that's louder than noise. Her best friend of 20 years, Sandra Pruitt, hugged her too long and whispered, you poor thing. Loud enough for the row behind. The casseroles started arriving like flowers for a funeral where nobody had died. Somebody left one on the porch with a note that said, God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And somebody else asked at Bible study, in front of everyone, whether Vivian had seen the signs. Because men don't just leave. And the question mark on that sentence was shaped like a knife. Your mother came home from that, Diane said, and took down every photo with Gordon in it. And then she kept going. She took down the ones of you, honey, the graduation portrait, the one of you two at the lake. Diane's voice got low. I found her on the kitchen floor one night that July, holding your school picture, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. And you know what she kept saying? I miss who I used to see. Not him. Who I used to see. Diane looked at me across the table. I'm not excusing her, she said. I'm explaining her. There's a difference. And I felt it right on schedule. The warm tide I'd been swimming against my whole adult life. The ache to fix this broken woman on the kitchen floor. That ache had run my whole adult life. Pity was the hook. And I'd been swallowing it and calling it love. Knowing her reasons made me kinder toward her, and it did not make me safer around her. And I finally understood those were 2 different facts. Here's a thing about the ER that civilians don't always know. When a code runs long, when we've shocked and pushed and compressed and the rhythm is gone and stays gone, somebody has to look at the clock and say the words out loud. Somebody has to call it. It is the worst job in the room and the most honest one. And the person who does it isn't giving up. They're telling the truth about what has already happened. That Thursday, in Marissa's bread-scented office, I told her I was done running this code. She asked what done looked like, specifically, because vague plans are how I'd survived instead of lived. So we built it the way I build a med list. I opened the file called What I Will Say, and this time the cursor moved. Not a trial. Not a list of every cut since 2010. Because a woman who can't hear one thing can't hear 90. 3 exhibits, that's all. The Christmas card with my shoulder in it. The folding chairs, gone before noon. The text on discharge, morning. Don't do anything dramatic. Then one sentence. The sentence, and I typed it and looked at it, and my pulse stayed level. Which is how I knew it was true. And then the terms. Because I'm a nurse. And we don't discharge anyone without instructions. Real counseling, not a pamphlet. Her naming what she did out loud, specifically. No fog, no if I hurt you somehow. Change that holds its shape over time, measured in seasons. No birthday card, apologies. No messages routed through Kendall. Renata read the file that night, and cried and said, "You're really going to hand her the quilt to..." And I said, yes, because the quilt was never an invoice. A gift you give to purchase something isn't a gift, it's a bribe. And I was done bribing. The quilt was true. All 60 squares of it. And she could keep the truth. The plan needed only one more thing, and that was an occasion. My mother, of all people, provided it. 5 days after the party, my phone rang at 7 in the evening. And the screen said Mom, a word that still does something to the animal part of the brain, no matter what the rest of it knows. First call in 6 weeks. I let it ring twice, then answered like a professional. Her voice came through bright and busy. The hostess voice, the one she uses on new people at church. "Paige, honey, so people keep asking about you." Sandra asked twice, and you know how she is. And Diane's been acting strange with me ever since the party. Very short, very cool. She took a breath, and I could hear her straightening the kitchen towel on its bar. "Come to Sunday brunch," she said. "Just family. Wear something nice. We'll put all this behind us." I stood at my window and listened to the sentence the way you listen to a heart for what's under the sound. Nothing about the hospital. And she knew, because Kendall tells her everything. It's load-bearing in their whole arrangement. Nothing that rhymed with sorry. What she was offering wasn't a door. It was a fresh coat of paint on a wall. And I was the crack that had started showing. And brunch was the putty knife. The old me, the auditioner, would have heard that call and floated for a week. Recipe cards in the mail. Warm front moving in. I heard the machinery now. Sandra's questions. Diane's coolness. A narrative fraying at church, needing its loose thread tucked in. And the loose thread was me. And the thread was expected to bring a dish. And still, I won't lie to you, some small 19-year-old part of me wanted to iron a dress. I closed my eyes and I saw square 45, teal against the flowered rose. "I'll come," I said. She said, "Wonderful, we'll see you at 10, and hung up happy. She thought she'd scheduled a repair. So did I, we just weren't repairing the same thing. Saturday night, I sewed the last stitch of binding and buried the thread tail inside the seam, the way Iris taught me, so the end doesn't show. I folded all 60 years of my mother into a brown paper bag with handles. Then I called my sister, because I had watched my mother run 14 years of quiet operations, and I was not going to run one of my own. "Kendall," I said, "I'm coming to brunch tomorrow. I'm going to say some things to Mom calmly, once. You can be in the room or not, but I'm not doing it behind anyone's back." Her voice went thin. "Paige, please don't ruin this. She's finally in a good place. The party made her so happy." I looked at the quilt bag by my door. "I'm not coming to ruin anything," I said. "I'm coming to return something." She was still talking when we said goodbye. Sunday morning. 10 a.m., I parked in front of the house on Cedar Street. The hydrangeas from the party sat dead in the recycling bin at the curb. On top of a stack of leftover invitations, silver script curling in the damp. Lemon polish and coffee met me on the porch like the ghosts of every Sunday of my childhood. My mother opened the door in her good apron, arms wide, smile set. "There's my girl," she said. 14 years. And she reached for that phrase today of all days, with company watching, because there was company. Past her shoulder, at the kitchen table, sat Aunt Diane, invited as an audience for the reconciliation show. And by the sink stood Kendall, twisting a dish towel into a rope. Everyone I needed. One room, no tent. I stepped over the threshold. And the screen door clapped shut behind me like a starter's pistol. The table was set like a magazine. Quiche and fruit and the good napkins. My mother's love language spoken fluently at everyone and no one. Before I'd even sat down, she pivoted to the refrigerator and produced a Tupperware container with a flourish. "We saved you a slice of the cake," she said. "Almond, from the good bakery. Everyone missed you." She held it out. My birthday party in a plastic box. A week old. offered like a sacrament. And the room held its breath, waiting for me to take my ration and be grateful. I looked at the slice, and something in me finished settling like sand in still water. "No, thank you," I said, and her eyebrows went up. Because I had never once in 33 years opened with no. I set the paper bag on the table instead. "Happy birthday, Mom." Curiosity beat caution. It always does with her. She drew out the quilt, and it unfolded down the length of the table, like a field coming up in spring. 60 squares, 10 rows, her whole life in fabric. And my mother, credit where it's due, saw it, truly saw it. Her hand went to her mouth. She touched the yellow curtain square and said, "The coffee cups. Oh my word." She found Iris's apron and her eyes filmed over. Diane leaned in, murmuring, "Vivian, look. The christening gown." For one long minute, she was just a woman being handed 60 years of herself, and she was beautiful, and I watched her and let it hurt. Then her fingers stopped. 8th row, 3rd square. Faded teal, out of place among the florals, clinical as a Monday. Her face did a small, careful thing. "What's this one?" she asked, though something in her voice suggested she'd rather not know. "That's me, Mom," I said, keeping my tone as even as a monitor. "That's the year you stopped seeing me and started seeing him." The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the coffee maker finish its cycle. 3 small clicks and a sigh. She pulled her hand back from the quilt as if the teal square had a temperature. "Paige," she said, warning lights coming on. "We're having a nice morning." "We are," I agreed, and I stayed in my chair and kept my voice at handoff volume. "The register you used to report vitals." Because I had promised myself one thing in the car, that I would not give this house a scene it could file under dramatic. "I only need a few minutes," I said, "and then I'll eat quiche. I promise. 3 things. Mom. The Christmas card when I was 22. 60 households got a photo of this family with my shoulder in it. You cropped me at the shoulder and mailed it to everyone we know." Kendall made a sound by the sink. I didn't look away from my mother. "The folding chairs. 3 weeks ago, you had Kendall ask me to deliver 12 chairs to a party I wasn't invited to, and to be gone before noon so nobody would see me. I brought them, Mom. I stacked them in the garage. I collapsed on the driveway before I got to leave on schedule. And then, while I was being discharged, you sent me a text." I quoted it from memory, slowly. "Feel better. Please don't do anything dramatic before today. It's important to me." Diane closed her eyes. My mother's chin came up, and the deflection cycle started right on time. Textbook first denial. "You're exaggerating. You've always been sensitive." Then the ledger. "After everything I've been through. I lost everything when your father walked out that door." And then, when neither of those moved me, she reached for the Old Faithful, the weapon that had worked for 14 years, and her voice cracked as she swung it. "You don't know what it's like," she said, "to look at someone every day and see the person who destroyed your life. You have his face. Paige, you've always had his face." Part 23. There it was. The sentence I'd been dodging since I was 19, fired at point-blank range in front of witnesses, and it landed on me. And for the first time in 14 years, it didn't go in. "I have his face, Mom," I said. "It's the only face I've got. I was 19. You handed me his bill, and I have been paying it ever since." Kendall whispered, "Can we please just eat?" And Aunt Diane, a peacemaker her whole life, folded her hands on the table and said the one thing that rearranged the room. "Let her finish, Vivian." My mother looked at Diane the way generals look at defecting officers, and something in her recalculated. I watched it happen, the pivot from defense to transaction, the hostess reaching for the last item in her pantry. "Fine," she said, and her palms came down flat on the table, rattling the good napkin rings. "Fine, you want to be included, Paige. Come to everything. Christmas, Easter, Sunday dinners, all of it. I'll tell everyone whatever you want me to say." She spread her hands like a dealer showing a clean table, and her voice softened into the register that used to buy me for a week. "Honey, I'll tell the whole church, my girls planned my 60th together. We can start fresh. Today, right now. Just let's not do all this." And there it was. Friends. Everything I had wanted since I was 19 years old. The whole catalog, holidays and a seat and my name said out loud in that sanctuary of casseroles. Offered to me across a quiche, with one small condition printed on the back of the box. "Whatever you want me to say, not do, not face. My admission ticket in exchange for the story staying clean." I looked at the offer the way Dr. Nakamura looked at my labs, and I saw what it was. A number that explains the whole chart. 14 years of long warm fronts, recipe cards, jam jars, all of it the same currency. And the currency was management. And I was a line item marked contain. I thought of square 45. I thought of the cursor blinking over an empty file. And the sentence I'd typed with a level pulse. I stood up. Not fast, the way you stand at the end of a long shift, and I said it. Mom, I'm removing you from my life. Her face, the face she spent 14 years protecting from mine, did something I had never seen it do. It stopped. Every practiced expression fell off it at once. Hostess, martyr, general, gone. And what was left was blank and open. A wall with all the pictures taken down, so I gave her the discharge instructions, slow and clear. This isn't punishment, I said. It's what's left after everything else failed. If you ever want to know me, here's the way back. A real counselor, weekly, someone who isn't me or Kendall. You naming what you did out loud. The cropping and the card tables and the chairs, without the word if anywhere in it. And time. Seasons of it. Actions holding their shape. No birthday cards. No drive-by apologies. Nothing routed through Kendall. She sputtered into tears, and they were real. I've seen enough fake ones to grade them. Kendall was crying too, saying, "She's 60, Paige. How can you be this cruel?" I picked up my purse. Then I laid my hand flat on the quilt one last time. 60 years of a woman I had loved with everything I had, and I slid it toward her across the table. "It was always yours, Mom," I said. "So was I, you just never unfolded me." And I walked out of my mother's kitchen, past the hydrangeas dying in the bin, into the plain gray Sunday light, and the screen door clapped once behind me, and nobody followed. And that was the whole revenge, and it was enough. I made it to the car before my hands started. I have started IVs in a moving ambulance. My hands do not shake. And there, in my mother's driveway, they shook like a beginner's. And I sat there and let them, because it turns out setting a weight down rattles you as hard as carrying it ever did. The screen door opened behind me. Diane came down the walk in her cardigan, and I braced for the ambassador visit. She didn't mean it. You know how she is. She leaned on my open window and looked at me for a moment. "I'll look after her," she said. "You go look after you." She glanced back at the house, then said the thing I didn't know I'd been waiting 7 years to hear. "Your grandmother asked the wrong daughter to do the caretaking. She knew better, and she did it anyway, because you were the strong one, and that wasn't fair. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say so out loud." She patted the window frame twice and walked back up the path to go sit with her sister, because somebody would. And it was never supposed to be me. I drove the 40 minutes to Columbus with the windows down and the radio off, listening to the highway hum, that long gray sound like a held breath finally leaving a body. In my apartment, out of pure clinical habit, I strapped on the blood pressure cuff, 127/82. Lower than the morning of the party. Lower than any reading since I'd bought the monitor. I sat on my couch in the quiet and I laughed alone at nothing, at everything. 3 months. That's the honest unit of measurement for what came next, because healing doesn't do montages. My blood pressure came down to 122/78. And at my follow-up they cut my dose in half. And I cried in the parking lot over a prescription, which Marissa says is called progress. Therapy every other week. I picked up pottery, and I'm terrible at it. And nobody in my family will ever grade my bowls. And that's the point of the bowls. Kendall went silent for 6 weeks, then sent a text with no greeting. The way you talk when you're ashamed. I didn't know about the chairs text until Diane showed me. "I'm sorry, Lily asks about you." I wrote back about Lily, mailed a birthday card with a pop-up frog, said nothing about our mother. And my sister and I are learning a strange new alphabet, one letter at a time. And then, on a Saturday in August, an envelope, real mail, my name and my mother's handwriting, the same hand that signed my field trip forms. Not a card, 3 pages, both sides. I stood at my kitchen counter and read sentences that had never existed in my mother's universe. "I made you carry him," one of them said. "You were 19, and I handed you a grown woman's grief because your face was the nearest place to put it down." She named the Christmas card. She named the chairs. No if, no but, no ledger of her own losses appended for balance. And near the end, this, "I see a counselor at the community center now. Tuesdays. I have gone 6 times. I hate it, and I keep going even when it makes me feel like a bad person, especially then." She didn't ask to see me. She didn't set a deadline. She signed it. "Love, your mother." And the word love looked like it had been written slowly. I put the letter in the drawer next to the blood pressure cuff, where the evidence lives. And I let it sit there a week while I checked my own pulse about it. And then I wrote back 1 page. A coffee shop on my side of Columbus, 1 hour after the holidays. If Tuesdays are still happening. Not a no, a not yet, with a map attached. She wrote back 2 lines. I'll keep going. Thank you for the map. My 34th birthday came in the fall, and here's where it landed. My apartment, my table, and nobody vanished by noon. Renata brought a cake with my whole name on it. Diane drove up with a jar of peach jam she'd made herself from her own tree, and winked when she handed it over. The quilt wasn't there. It lives in Millersburg, on the back of my mother's couch. Diane tells me she sleeps under it every night, all 60 squares, teal one included. Some gifts you give, some you finally give back to yourself. Here is what 14 years finally taught me. Pain that a person refuses to feel doesn't disappear. It just gets handed to whoever looks most like it. And the bravest thing I ever did was not carrying my mother's grief 1 more mile, but setting it down on her kitchen table next to 60 squares of everything we'd been, and walking out light enough at last to be somebody's whole daughter, even if only my own. That's my story. 1 quilt, 60 squares, 1 slice of cake I never touched, and a chair I finally stopped waiting for. If someone in your family only sees a face from their past when they look at you, remember you're allowed to be seen somewhere else. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.